You thought it was just Craigslist. A room too cheap a job, too easy, a buyer too polite. But then the van waits all night and the landlord knows your past life, and someone leaves a note under your pillow. These aren't weird coincidences. They're true Craigslist horror stories from people who got out just in time. This is High Scary Stories. Hit subscribe, stay alert, and never trust what sounds perfect online. Story 1. The Windowless Room. I didn't grow up with much. My mom raised me and my younger sister on a waitress's salary after my dad disappeared when I was 6. We lived paycheck to paycheck in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Knoxville. I never had my own room, barely had privacy, and learned pretty early how to stretch $1. College was always the plan, but I knew it'd be on me to make it happen. When I got accepted to Westcott University, a small but decent school 2 hours from home, it felt like a win. But reality hit fast. Tuition ate up nearly all of my financial aid, and I still had to figure out housing. The dorms were outrageously expensive, and off-campus apartments wanted deposits and co-signers I didn't have. I was working part-time at a gas station near home, trying to save every cent. But by early August, I still didn't have a place to live. I checked every listing board and student forum I could find, but most rooms were either taken overpriced or way too far from campus. That's when my mom, bless her heart, offered to help me search. She didn't know much about apps or student housing portals, but she did know Craigslist. One evening, she sent me a screenshot that changed everything. The listing looked too good to be true. A room for rent just 15 minutes from campus, $350 a month. Utilities included no deposit, no credit check. The post was simple, no flashy language, just a few photos of a tidy house with beige siding and a quiet front porch. The ad said the homeowner was a quiet older man in his late 40s who lived in the finished basement and preferred female tenants because of bad experiences with male roommates in the past. It also mentioned he had his own entrance-own kitchen and kept to himself. My mom was excited, texting me, "This sounds perfect, honey. Cheap, clean, and he won't be in your space." I wasn't sure. Something about the phrasing felt off, like it was trying too hard to sound safe. Still, I was desperate. At that point, I would have considered living in a tent, as long as I could make it to class. We emailed the guy, and he replied within an hour. His name was Tom. He thanked us for reaching out and said we could come tour the place the next day if we were free. My mom offered to drive. She wanted to see it for herself, and honestly, I didn't mind having her there. That night, I stared at the pictures again and again. The house looked normal, too normal. Every room was clean but sterile. No clutter, no color, no personality. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. I needed a room. I needed this to work. So the next morning we made the drive, and I tried to push the unease in my gut somewhere deep enough that it wouldn't ruin the chance. We pulled up to the house around 10 in the morning. It was tucked on a quiet street in a suburban neighborhood just outside the city. The grass was freshly cut. A wind chime tinkled softly from the porch, and a hummingbird feeder hung by the kitchen window. It looked pleasant, comfortably boring in the way you'd expect from someone who kept to themselves. As we walked up the steps, the front door opened before we even knocked. A man stepped out in average build, maybe late 40s or early 50s, wearing jeans and a tucked-in polo shirt. His hair was thinning, but he smiled wide and stepped forward with his hand out. "You must be Rachel," he said, looking at me before turning to my mom. "And Mom, I assume?" We shook hands. His grip was firm but dry, like he'd been waiting for us. "Come on in," he said cheerfully. "Shoes off if you don't mind. I like to keep things tidy." The inside of the house was spotless. Not just clean, but unnaturally organized. The living room looked like a furniture showroom. No magazines, no stray cups, no cords or chargers. Just a perfectly fluffed couch, 3 decorative pillows, and a side table with 1 candle unlit. My mom started chatting with him right away. She always had that small-town charm that made strangers open up. She asked how long he'd lived there, what he did for work, how the neighborhood was. Meanwhile, I kept quiet and looked around. Something about the place felt hollow. Too clean, too curated. There were no family photos, no signs of anyone else living there. It felt like walking into a demo unit designed to look lived in, but missing something human. After a few minutes of polite small talk, Tom clapped his hands together and said, "Well, let me show you the room." I assumed we'd head upstairs. The listing had said the rental rooms were on the 2nd floor, but instead he turned toward a narrow door off the main hallway and opened it, gesturing for us to follow. I hesitated. My mom didn't. She just smiled and walked right in like this was completely normal. I followed reluctantly. The stairs creaked slightly as we descended into a cold, dimly lit basement. The carpet was thin and slightly damp around the edges. The walls were painted a dull off-white, but the paint was uneven, like it had been done in a hurry to cover something up. At the end of a narrow hallway, Tom opened a door and stepped aside. "This would be your room," he said. I stepped in and immediately felt a rush of unease. It was small. Smaller than I expected, maybe 8 by 10 feet with no closet, and most notably, no windows. Just 4 blank walls and a twin bed pushed up against one corner. A single lamp on a wobbly dresser lit the space with a weak yellow glow. "You'd share the bathroom just down the hall with me," Tom said casually. "But I'm quiet, you'll barely notice I'm here." I glanced at the bathroom, clean, but cramped. A ripped shower curtain hung limply, and 2 identical blue toothbrushes sat in the holder. Something wasn't right. This wasn't what the listing promised. Not even close. I stood in the center of that tiny room trying to stay polite, but my skin was crawling. My mom, ever the optimist, was asking Tom about laundry access and trash pickup, like we weren't standing in what looked more like a storage unit than a bedroom. I moved toward the bed, pretending to inspect the mattress, mostly to give myself a second to breathe. That's when I noticed something strange right beside the bed. Low on the wall near the floor was a power outlet that looked wrong. The screws weren't flush with the cover plate, and there was a tiny black circle in the corner that caught the dim light oddly. I crouched down, pretending to tie my shoe, and leaned closer. That's when I realized what I was looking at. A pinhole lens. A micro camera embedded directly in the outlet cover. My blood ran cold. I didn't say anything. I just stood up and turned to my mom. "Hey, we should probably get going. I have work later, remember?" She blinked, confused. Tom's smile twitched. "No rush," he said quickly. "Your mom mentioned you'd be home alone next week while they're out of town. Maybe stop by again for dinner with me and the girls upstairs. You can get a feel for the place." Girls upstairs. There were no sounds, no signs, no shoes by the door, no hair in the bathroom, nothing. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I'll think about it." But in that moment, I knew I wasn't coming back. And something inside me whispered I might have just seen something I was never supposed to. As soon as we stepped back upstairs, I tugged at my mom's sleeve and whispered, "We need to go, now." She gave me a look, half confused, half annoyed, but I didn't give her time to argue. I forgot I have a shift later. "We're running late." Tom followed us to the door, still smiling, still friendly, but there was something tighter behind his eyes now, like he knew I'd noticed something. "Well, let me know," he said as we walked out. "We don't want the room sitting empty too long." I didn't answer. The second we got into the car, I locked the doors and looked at my mom. "That place isn't safe. I saw a camera in the outlet. He lied about everything. There's no one else living there." She didn't respond right away. Then she said almost to herself, "I thought something felt weird." When we got home, I tried to report the listing, but it was already gone, completely vanished, like it had never existed. A few days later, just out of curiosity, I checked Craigslist again, and there it was. A new post, same house, same price, different photos, slightly different wording. This time the ad mentioned a quiet basement unit female tenants preferred. I flagged it instantly. I never found out what happened to that room. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about it, and how close I came to walking into something I might never have walked out of. Story 2. The Man Who Came to Buy a Radio. I was 3 days away from rent being due and about $170 short. I had already sold off most of what I could, an old blender, a bookshelf I never used, and half my closet. My job at the bakery barely paid enough to cover groceries, and my savings had been wiped out 2 months earlier when my car needed emergency repairs. I wasn't panicking yet, but the pressure was starting to settle in, like a weight on my chest. That was when I remembered the radio. It was my grandfather's old Emerson Model 400 tube radio, a cherrywood antique from the 1940s. It hadn't worked in years, but the casing was beautiful and well preserved. I had kept it more out of sentiment than practicality, but sentiment wasn't going to keep the lights on. I dusted it off, took a few photos in good lighting, and posted it on Craigslist with a simple title, "Vintage Emerson Radio, $400 or best offer." Within an hour, I had a dozen responses. Most were scams or lowball offers. One guy offered me $75 and a half-functioning tablet. But then one message stood out. It was short, polite, and oddly direct. "Hi, I am interested in the radio. I can pay $500 cash. I can pick it up today after 5. Let me know." The name on the message was Mark. I blinked. 500. That was more than I asked for. It never worked that way on Craigslist. But when you are broke and desperate, you don't question luck. You say yes. So I did. Mark texted again around 4:30 to say he was on the way. I lit a candle in the kitchen to cover up the smell of Cleo's wet dog food and placed the radio carefully on the table, trying to make the apartment look more presentable than it was. I kept telling myself this was a good thing. $500 meant I could pay rent and maybe have a little left over for groceries. Still, something about the whole situation put a pit in my stomach I couldn't quite explain. At exactly 5:11 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole. The man outside wasn't what I pictured. He was tall, maybe in his late 50s, with a thick gray beard and a leather vest over a flannel shirt. His jeans looked worn, his boots scuffed. He looked like someone who'd be more at home riding through the desert on a Harley than buying antiques on Craigslist. I opened the door, trying to sound casual. "It must be Mark." He nodded. "Yeah. You got the radio right over here," I said, stepping aside. Cleo trotted up, tail wagging, but stopped short when she saw him. Her ears went back, and she didn't bark, just stared. He glanced at her briefly. "Dog yours?" "Yeah. She's usually friendly." He didn't respond. He walked straight to the table and began examining the radio. Silence stretched as he turned the knobs and inspected the back panel. Then he looked at me. "Not in great shape. I'll give you 300. His tone was calm, but something about his eyes felt off dark, unblinking. He reached out to hand me the money, And when our fingers touched his hand, lingered on mine just a second too long. I told myself not to make it weird. Maybe he was just one of those socially awkward types who didn't know how to act in someone else's space. I took the $300, tucked it into a drawer, and watched as he lifted the radio gently and walked out without another word. I closed the door, locked it, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The whole thing had felt off, but the money was real, and the radio was gone, so I tried to brush it off. I made dinner, watched a movie, and even laughed a little at how paranoid I'd been. He was just strange. That didn't mean he was dangerous. I was curled up in bed with Cleo beside me when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Hello? There was a pause. Then a low, gravelly voice replied. You were real nice to me today. My stomach dropped. It was Mark. I didn't say anything. He continued slowly. Too nice, actually. I gotta tell you something. I sat up frozen. I wasn't coming to buy anything. I had a knife in my pocket. I was gonna kill you. My mouth went dry. I couldn't speak. But you smiled at me, he said. You made me feel like I mattered. Gave me a snack. Treated me like a person. I couldn't do it. Another pause. Anyway, take care of yourself, Ella. Don't trust people so easy. Then the line went dead. I stared at the screen, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I had never felt so cold in my life. Cleo whined beside me, sensing something was wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept thinking about the knife and how close I had come. I sat there in the dark, phone still in my hand, replaying his voice over and over. It wasn't just what he said, it was how calm he sounded. Like he wasn't confessing to something monstrous, just sharing a personal detail. I wanted to scream, cry, throw up something. But I couldn't move. Cleo pressed against me, her body warm and trembling. Clutched her tight, trying to convince myself it was over, that he was gone. But my mind kept looping one line. I had a knife in my pocket. I was going to kill you. What did he mean by too nice? I had barely spoken. Just lit a candle, smiled, said thank you. It hadn't felt like kindness. It had felt like fear. Maybe that's what saved me. I reported the call to the police the next day. They took a report, asked if I had the phone number or any identifying information. But the number had been spoofed, untraceable. No license plate, no last name. I didn't even have security footage outside my building. Unless he comes back, one officer told me there's not much we can do. I changed the locks that same afternoon. Bought a second deadbolt. Took Cleo to stay with my friend for a few nights. The silence of the apartment had turned heavy, like it was pressing in from the walls. I couldn't focus on anything, not books, not music, not even sleep. Every sound made me jump. A creak in the floorboards, the hum of the fridge. I'd always thought that fear was loud. Screaming chaos chased scenes. But that night taught me the worst fear is quiet. It comes with a soft voice, a thank you, and a warning you didn't ask for. A week passed. I tried to move on. I told myself he was gone, that it was a one-time encounter, a brush with danger that ended without blood. I went back to work, brought Cleo home, kept the doors locked and the curtains drawn. I even started leaving a light on in the living room at night, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. But the unease never left. It sat in the background of everything like a hum just below hearing. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. My name printed neatly on the front. I opened it standing in the hallway, keys still in my hand. Inside was a single photo. An actual print, not a digital copy. My front door, my apartment. taken at night from a distance just far enough to blur the edges. But I recognized the angle instantly. It was the view from the far end of the street behind the lamppost that flickered when it rained. The timestamp in the corner read 2:39 a.m. The porch light was off in the picture. I hadn't been home. I dropped the envelope. My hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't unlock the door for a full minute. I called the police again, showed them the photo. They took it more seriously this time, opened an investigation, told me to keep lights on, watch for unfamiliar vehicles, and never open the door without checking. But nothing ever came of it. The man never returned. Or if he did, I never saw him. And that's almost worse, knowing someone stood in the dark outside my home watching. And that kindness might have saved me once, but it wouldn't save me again. The officer who came to take the report was younger, maybe mid-20s, and tried his best to reassure me. He walked the property, looked for footprints, asked if I had any exterior cameras. I didn't. I never thought I'd need them in this neighborhood. He took the photo into evidence and told me someone from the detective unit would follow up. But deep down, I already knew how this would go. No name, no fingerprints, no video, just a blurry photo and a story that sounded too strange to pursue. Still, I filed the report, changed my locks again, and bought a cheap motion sensor camera from the hardware store. I checked the footage every night before bed. Nothing. The detectives called twice to ask follow-up questions, but after 3 weeks, the case went cold. "We'll let you know if anything turns up," they said, but their tone made it clear nothing would. I started avoiding windows. I barely slept. I'd wake up at every small noise, Cleo shifting in her bed, the pipes groaning, a branch tapping against the siding. I kept imagining him standing outside again, waiting, watching. Maybe he just needed to know I remembered. Maybe the photo wasn't a threat, it was a message. That he could come back whenever he wanted, that he still had the knife. And this time, maybe he wouldn't let kindness stop him. I don't post on Craigslist anymore. I don't sell anything online. I don't trust strangers. Because once someone looks at you like prey, you never really feel invisible again. Story 3. The girlfriend who filed the lie. I was 21 the first time I hit real rock bottom. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. No overdoses or hospital beds, just the slow, grinding collapse of everything I had been barely holding together. I had dropped out of community college after losing my part-time job at the auto shop. My girlfriend Elise had just left me, and I was living in my mom's garage surrounded by half-finished projects and regret. I couldn't sleep, barely ate, and started taking leftover hydros from my wisdom tooth surgery just to shut my brain off. When those ran out, I found a guy I used to know in high school who sold Xanax. It helped until it didn't. Pretty soon I was mixing whatever I could get: pills, beer, cold medicine. I wasn't trying to die, but I wasn't really trying to stay alive either. One night while scrolling through Craigslist under the personal section, I found an ad that felt different. The headline said, "Looking for companionship without judgment." The photo was blurry, a woman smoking on a porch with a dog in the background. She said her name was Sierra, she was 34, and just wanted someone real to talk to. I didn't care about the age difference. I didn't care about the low-res photo. I just wanted to feel wanted. I messaged her something stupid and rambling sent at 2 a.m. while I was half high and half empty inside. She responded an hour later. "You sound sweet. Want to meet up tonight? I can drive." I should have seen how fast that response came as a red flag. But I didn't. I said yes. And that's how it started. Sierra showed up that night around 11 in an old silver Impala with a cracked windshield and one headlight out. She was bigger than I expected, with tired eyes and a raspy voice that sounded like it belonged to someone who'd smoked 2 packs a day for years. But she smiled when she saw me and asked if I was okay in a tone that felt weirdly maternal. I nodded, got in the car, and let her take me wherever she wanted. We ended up at her apartment on the east side of town, a small 1-bedroom above a pawn shop. It wasn't much, but it was clean stocked with snacks, cheap beer, and incense burning in the corner. She handed me a drink, put on some low music, and let me collapse into the couch without asking a single question. That night turned into a week, then a month, then more. I started spending every night at her place. She gave me a drawer for my clothes, let me use her Wi-Fi, cooked frozen dinners for us, and never told me to leave. When I was high, she was quiet. When I was crashing, she held me. It wasn't love. It was survival. I needed a warm place to land, and she needed someone who looked at her like she still mattered. I told myself we were helping each other. She never asked me to pay rent or contribute anything besides attention, sex, and vague promises that I was getting better. Every time I tried to mention quitting pills or getting clean, she would distract me, offering me a joint, pulling me back to bed, or starting to cry until I dropped the subject. "You don't need to change, baby," she'd whisper. "You just need someone who gets you." And I wanted so badly to believe that. About 6 months in, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. Sierra became more possessive, more intense about where I was, who I talked to when I was coming back. She'd text me 10-15 times in an hour if I didn't answer right away. If I said I needed to go see my mom or run errands alone, she'd get quiet, sulk, or suddenly bring up how lonely she felt. Then one night, while we were lying on her sagging couch with the TV buzzing in the background, she turned to me and said it straight. "I've been thinking," she said, "maybe we should make this official. Like, get married." I blinked. "What?" She smiled, but it was tight, nervous. "I've got great insurance. You could get into rehab therapy, even detox. We'd be helping each other." She leaned her head on my shoulder like we were already planning a future. I gave a half laugh, tried to brush it off. "I don't know, Sierra. That's a lot." She didn't say anything, just stared at me for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between hurt and calculation. After that night, everything started to fray. She stopped cooking, barely spoke unless I spoke first. The warmth that once wrapped around me like a blanket turned cold and brittle. 1 week later, when I asked if I could crash at her place for a few days, just a few, she exploded. "You just use me like everyone else." She screamed, slamming a dish into the sink. "You're a goddamn parasite." I left that night. Didn't take anything. Didn't call. I told myself it was over. But Sierra wasn't the kind of person who let things go. I just didn't know yet how far she was willing to go to prove it. 2 weeks after I walked out of her apartment, my mom came downstairs holding a letter with shaking hands. Her face was pale. She handed it to me without a word. It was from the county courthouse. Sierra Langford had filed for a temporary protective order against me. In her statement, she claimed I had kidnapped her at knife point, forced her into her own car, taken her back to her apartment, and sexually assaulted her multiple times over the course of a single night. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My legs went numb. I had no idea what to say to my mom, who stood there silently as I read every line. None of it was true. Not a single word. I hadn't even spoken to Sierra since I left. But there it was in black and white with her signature and a scheduled court hearing. 3 days later at 2:42 in the morning, I got a call from a blocked number. I was half asleep and answered instinctively. It was Sierra crying. "I'm so sorry, Jamie," she sobbed. "I didn't mean it. I just panicked." Please let me make it right. I hung up without saying a word. The next night, I heard loud knocking on the door. I opened it, expecting a friend. Instead, I was staring down the barrel of a taser-red lights dancing across my chest. "Are you Jamie Carter?" one of the officers asked. I barely had time to answer before another one cracked me in the leg with a baton and shoved me face first onto the concrete. I was cuffed before I could ask what I'd even done. They said I was under arrest for kidnapping and rape. I just kept repeating the same thing. It's not true. None of this is true. But no one listened. Not yet. They booked me that night, tossed me into a holding cell wearing paper scrubs, and took everything I had, phone, wallet, dignity. I sat there shaking, trying to replay everything in my head. The last time I saw Sierra was the night she begged me to come back. I hadn't even touched her. I remembered we stopped at a Quick Mart. On the way to her place, she had gone inside alone to buy cigarettes while I stayed in the car. That stop saved my life. The next morning, a detective finally sat down across from me in a dim interview room and asked me calmly, "Do you know a woman named Sierra Langford?" I nodded. He slid a paper across the table. "She says you kidnapped her and held her against her will." I shook my head. That's not what happened. She called me, picked me up. We stopped at a gas station. There's footage. He didn't respond, just wrote something down. Hours later, another officer came back. This time his tone had changed. "We found the surveillance video," he said. She was laughing with the cashier. No signs of distress. It unraveled fast after that. Too many holes in her story, inconsistencies, timeline gaps. And the store footage proved she wasn't under duress. Charges were dropped, but not right away. I spent 4 nights in jail before they finally let me go. I walked out dazed hollow with no apology, no explanation, just a bag of my things and a warning to stay out of trouble. My mom cried when she picked me up. I hadn't cried yet, but that moment came close. I should have felt free. But I didn't, because I knew this wasn't over. I knew Sierra wasn't done, and I had no idea what she'd do next. It's been 4 years since the charges were dropped. I've been clean for 2 of them, got a steady job at a mechanics shop in Colombia, and finally moved out of my mom's house. I rent a quiet 1-bedroom apartment with blackout curtains and deadbolts on every door. I keep to myself. I don't date much. I don't really trust anyone. Because even now, Sierra hasn't disappeared. Every once in a while, I'll get a blocked call at 2 or 3 in the morning. If I answer, there's just breathing. Sometimes crying. Sometimes silence. I've blocked so many numbers, I've lost count. But she always finds new ones. One time, after a few months of quiet, I started seeing someone. Her name was Rachel. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. That lasted about 6 weeks. Then Rachel got a Facebook message from an account with no profile photo. The message was long, full of accusations, said I had abused her, that I'd been arrested, that she had proof I was dangerous. It took one message to ruin it. Rachel confronted me scared and confused. I showed her the court documents, the dropped charges, everything. She believed me, but it didn't matter. Things changed. She pulled away. Eventually, she stopped returning my texts. That's how Sierra works now. Not through the courts, through whispers, anonymous emails, fake accounts. She doesn't need to show up at my door to ruin my life, just plant enough doubt. And what scares me most is that it works. Because people believe the first thing they hear, and once someone thinks you're capable of something monstrous, there's no taking that shadow off your name. Not really? Not ever. Story 4. The Hug That Haunted Me. I had just moved into my first real apartment after graduating college, a small one-bedroom on the second floor of a building in a quiet neighborhood called Meadow Grove. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean close to work and mine. The problem was I had way too much stuff and barely enough space to walk. So I did what everyone else does when they're settling in. I posted a few things on Craigslist. A beat-up coffee table, some old video game controllers, and a large black sports duffel I hadn't used since high school. The bag was still in good condition, heavy-duty zippers, waterproof lining, reinforced straps. I listed it for $30, hoping someone local would come grab it. The next morning, I got a message from someone named Emil. He offered me $50 without hesitation and said he could come by that evening. His tone was polite, his message short, and he claimed to live just a few blocks over. I didn't think twice. I gave him my address and told him to swing by around 7. Looking back, maybe I should have been more cautious, but he seemed normal. And really, how weird could a duffel bag exchange get? At worst, I figured he might try to haggle. What I didn't expect was to meet someone who would leave a mark on me in a way no stranger ever had. At exactly 7:03 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man in his early 40s standing there with a slight smile. He was tall and thin with neatly combed hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a dark green jacket, even though it was warm outside, and he carried nothing with him. No wallet, no phone in hand, just empty palms hanging at his sides. Emil, I asked. He nodded slowly. Yes. Thank you for having me. His voice was soft. Too soft. Like the way someone speaks in a hospital room. I handed him the duffel bag, already zipped up, and told him it was in great condition, barely used. He took it gently, like it was made of glass, and held it against his chest. It's perfect, he said, smiling. Then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me in a hug. Not a casual one-armed thank you squeeze, but a full-bodied, both arms, eyes closed embrace. I froze. At first I thought maybe he was just the overly friendly type, but the hug lasted longer than it should have. Too long. 10 seconds. Maybe 15. I could feel his breath slow against my shoulder like he was savoring the contact. Finally, I pulled back. Okay, well, glad you like it, I said, trying to sound light. Emil opened his eyes and gave a small, almost sad smile. You have a very kind energy, he said. Some people, they carry light. I didn't know how to respond. He thanked me again, turned, and walked slowly back down the hallway. I watched him through the peephole until he disappeared from view. Something about that hug stayed with me, and not in a good way. 2 days later, just as I was finishing a late lunch, there was another knock at the door. I assumed it was a delivery, maybe a neighbor. But when I opened it, 2 men stood there, both in plain clothes, badges clipped to their belts. One of them was holding a printed photo. Are you Alex Marin? The taller one asked. My stomach sank. Yeah. Is something wrong? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he held up the photo. Do you recognize this man? It was a grainy but unmistakable image of Emil. Same glasses, same haircut, same soft expression. I nodded slowly. Yeah. Came by a couple nights ago. Bought a gym bag off Craigslist. The officers exchanged a look. The shorter one pulled out a small notebook. When exactly was that? Did he give you a full name, any contact info? I told them everything I could remember. Emil, the time he came, how he acted, the hug. As I spoke, their expressions tightened. Finally, the taller one sighed. We're sorry to drop in like this, but this guy's a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. His name isn't Emil. He's been using different names through Craigslist meetups to get close to people, usually men who live alone. "Wait," I said, pulse starting to quicken. "Close how that bag he bought from you," the officer said carefully. "We think he used it 2 nights ago." There was a break-in on the south end of the city. The description matched him perfectly. No signs of forced entry, but the victim's front door was unlocked, like someone had been there before. That's when I remembered the hug again, how close he'd gotten. How he might have seen the lock, the layout, everything. I suddenly felt sick. The detectives didn't tell me everything, not right away. But over the next couple weeks, more pieces began to surface through online articles, a brief follow-up call, and one vague news segment that barely mentioned his name. Apparently, the bag I sold Emil, or whatever his real name was, had been recovered during a police sweep of an abandoned property, tied to a different case entirely. Inside, officers found a portable hard drive wrapped in plastic and duct tape, buried beneath old clothes and plastic containers. At first, they assumed it was just backup storage until they cracked it open. What they found was worse than anything I had imagined. Dozens of folders, thousands of files. Most were images and videos, sensitive, disturbing, and very illegal. They weren't clear on the details, but the term classified exploitation material was mentioned more than once. Whoever he was, this guy had been collecting digital evidence of things that should never exist. Files that connected him to private surveillance rings, black market trading forums, and possibly even something larger, more organized. But the hard drive had no fingerprints, no identifying metadata, no location stamps. He had wiped everything clean except for the images themselves. The only clue they had, the duffel bag. My duffel bag. Traced back to the Craigslist sale with my name and address attached. I wasn't a suspect, but for days I kept replaying the exchange. The hug, the softness of his voice, the way he held the bag like it was more than just storage, like it already had a purpose. That's when it hit me. He hadn't bought the bag for what it could carry. He'd chosen it, chosen me. I had no idea if he was watching from afar. But I started locking the door 3 times each night, just in case. About a week after the detectives visited, the property manager for my building called unexpectedly. She sounded rattled. Said she'd been reviewing the security camera feeds after getting a request from the police and noticed something that no one had mentioned yet. I didn't think it was anything she said, her voice low. But then I kept watching. The footage showed Emil's same clothes, same quiet expression leaving my unit at 7:12 p.m., just minutes after the exchange. He walked down the hall slowly, the duffel bag slung over his shoulder like a casual gym goer. But then, instead of exiting the building, he turned and stood by the stairwell door. For a long time. Minutes passed. He didn't move. He just stood there staring down the hallway in the direction of my apartment. At one point, he leaned against the wall like he was waiting. Another tenant passed him. He smiled and stepped aside. But he didn't leave. According to the timestamp, Emil remained on my floor for nearly 2 hours. He didn't knock again, didn't try the door. Just lingered, watching, listening. Maybe memorizing the sounds of my lock, the timing of my lights. My stomach turned as I imagined him standing just beyond my door, only a few feet away, while I sat on the couch, completely unaware. The manager burned the footage onto a flash drive and gave it to the police. They said they'd add it to the case file, but no arrest ever came. Emil vanished again. And every creak in the hallway after that, every shadow under the door felt like it could be him just waiting for another reason to knock. Story 5. The Blue Van in the Dark. It had only been 2 days since my bike was stolen, but it already felt like something had been ripped out of my daily routine. It wasn't just a bike, it was how I got to work, how I cleared my head after long shifts, how I felt a little bit free in a city that often felt too big and too loud. I had locked it outside the bookstore like I always did, using a U-lock around the front wheel and frame. But when I came out after closing, it was gone. No broken lock, no sign of struggle. Just the empty rack and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I filed a report with the police, knowing it probably wouldn't go anywhere, and checked Craigslist out of habit more than hope. I didn't expect to find anything. But then late that night, I saw it. A post under "for sale." Bikes. No title, no details. Just a photo. But I knew that bike like my own handwriting. The chipped paint on the back frame, the mismatched pedals, even the faded sticker on the handlebars from a concert I went to in high school. It was my bike. Listed for $150. Cash only. The seller's name was just T-Location 5 miles across town. Meet-up spot, a gas station parking lot. Time after dark preferred. I should have called the police. But I didn't. I just replied, interested. "When can I come by?" he messaged back within minutes. "Hey, I'm Dan. Still got the bike. Can meet tonight if you're serious. Cash only." His tone was direct, short, almost like he was in a rush. I asked where and when, pretending to play it cool, even though my hands were already sweating. Corner of Jackson and Hollis. Big warehouse with blue siding. There's a lot behind it. 11 p.m. sharp. I read the message twice. That part of town was all industrial old factories, shipping centers, and barely any streetlights after dark. Definitely not the kind of place you meet someone for a friendly Craigslist exchange. I hesitated, thinking maybe I'd just take the evidence to the police after all. But then I thought about the odds they'd do anything. I didn't have a serial number. I didn't have receipts. And more than that, I wanted to look Dan in the face. I wanted to see the kind of person who steals something and resells it with zero shame. So I told him I'd be there. He responded instantly. "Cool. Look for a blue van. I'll be parked out back." I threw on a hoodie, grabbed a flashlight, and a small can of pepper spray I'd never actually used, and headed out. As I drove through the dark, empty streets, the glow of the city lights disappeared behind me. Street signs got rustier. Sidewalks turned into gravel. And when I turned onto Jackson, I saw the warehouse huge, windowless, and silent. The lot behind it was nearly pitch black. No cameras, no other cars. Just a single blue van parked at an angle with its headlights off. I parked half a block away and sat there, engine running, heart pounding, unsure whether I was brave or just incredibly stupid. I sat in my car with the engine idling, trying to slow my breathing. The blue van didn't move. No headlights, no engine noise. Just a big, boxy silhouette sitting dead still at the far end of the lot. The closer I looked, the more off it felt. First, it wasn't actually blue. It was navy, almost black and dirty enough that it barely reflected any light. Second, there were no license plates. Not front, not back. Just an empty mount where they should have been. I scanned the surrounding area. No streetlights, no open businesses, no foot traffic. Just me, the van, and the hollow silence of a forgotten corner of the city. Against my better judgment, I got out of the car. I left it unlocked, keys in my pocket, pepper spray clutched tight in my right hand. The gravel crunched under my sneakers as I made my way across the lot. When I was about 10 feet away from the van, and the driver's side window rolled down halfway. Inside, I could barely make out a figure. A man, I assumed. Wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. "You here for the bike?" the voice asked. Flat. emotionless. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I see it?" There was a pause. Then the van's back doors clicked, but didn't open. "It's in the back. You can come check it out." I didn't move. "You're not getting out?" I asked. Another pause. "Don't like strangers." You want it or not, something in me screamed to walk away. But something else, stubborn, angry, tired, kept me rooted to the spot. I took one slow step toward the back of the van. Just one. The engine was still off. The night held its breath. And I realized I might have made a very serious mistake. I hesitated beside the van, one hand still gripping the pepper spray in my pocket, the other hovering near the rear door handle. The silence was unbearable. No music, no city hum, just wind brushing against the warehouse walls and my own breathing echoing in my ears. Something wasn't right. I glanced to the side toward the rear window. It was smeared with dirt and dust, but just clear enough to make out what was inside. And that's when I saw it. Resting on the passenger seat, tilted slightly toward the back, was a white plastic mask. Not just any mask, the kind with the pointed mustache and sharp smirk. A Guy Fawkes mask, the kind protesters wear, the kind hackers post online, the kind people wear when they don't want to be seen as people at all. It wasn't lying there casually either. It was propped up, facing the window, watching. My throat tightened. My feet moved before my mind did, stepping quickly back toward my car. But before I made it halfway, the van's engine rumbled to life. Headlights snapped on, flooding the lot in harsh beams. I turned and ran, keys slipping in my hand. I fumbled the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me just as the van peeled forward. It didn't chase me, not fully, but it crept closer, pulling into the middle of the lot, blocking the exit for a moment. Through my windshield, I could see the mask still staring, still smirking. Then, without warning, the van reversed fast, made a sharp turn, and disappeared into the shadows between the warehouses. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat there shaking while my stolen bike remained somewhere inside that van, riding away into the dark, with something far worse than a thief behind the wheel. I didn't even remember pulling out of the lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. But somehow, I made it back to the main road. My heart was pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. I didn't stop. I didn't think. I just kept driving with one goal in mind. Somewhere public, somewhere bright, somewhere with cameras and people. The first place I saw was a Walmart about 1.5 miles away. I swerved into the parking lot, nearly clipping a cart return, and jumped out of the car before I'd even turned off the engine. I ran inside breathless and wide-eyed, straight to the customer service desk. The woman behind the counter looked up, startled. "Are you okay?" she asked. I shook my head, barely able to speak. "Someone tried to lure me. With my bike, Craigslist." He had a mask, no plates. She blinked, then reached for the phone. Within minutes, a manager and then a local cop, who happened to be nearby, arrived. I gave them everything I could remember: description of the van, the location, the fake name, the warehouse address, the Guy Fawkes mask, all of it. They took me seriously, at least more seriously than I expected. But when they went to search the lot, the van was long gone. No cameras, no witnesses, no trace. Just me shaking under fluorescent lights, wondering what would have happened if I had opened that door. The police took my statement, logged the report, and promised to follow up. But as the days turned into weeks, the calls stopped. I checked in a couple of times, but it was always the same answer. No new leads, no matching vehicle, nothing they could do without a license plate or a clear face. I tried to move on, though I parked closer to building entrances, now always kept my phone in my hand when walking alone. Then one evening, while scrolling through the local news site, I froze. A headline read, "Authorities seek help identifying suspect in series of disappearances." Below it was a police sketch, sunken eyes, thin lips, narrow face. It wasn't exact, but I recognized the shape. The hood, the silence, the smirk that stayed too long. I didn't need confirmation. I knew. It was the man in the van. And I had almost opened that door. Story 6. The Landlord Who Believed in Reincarnation. I was in my second year of college when I started looking for a new place to live. My current roommate had just dropped out mid-semester, leaving me to cover the full rent on an apartment I couldn't afford. I spent nights scrolling through Craigslist, hoping for a miracle, a clean, safe room near campus that wouldn't eat my entire paycheck. Most of the listings were scams or already taken. Then I saw one that stood out. Room available in quiet home. Female student preferred. $400 month, all utilities included. Must be comfortable with quiet hours and respectful of spiritual beliefs. Text only. It was a bit vague, but the price was unreal, and the photos showed a clean room with hardwood floors and lots of light. I sent a polite text asking if it was still available. A minute later, my phone rang. No name, just a number. I hesitated. The post specifically said to text only, but something curiosity nerves instinct made me answer. "Hello," I said. There was a pause, and then a deep, calm voice replied. "I knew you'd pick up. You've been here before, haven't you?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." The voice chuckled softly. "It's all right. You don't remember yet? But your energy feels the same. Let's meet tomorrow." Then the call ended. The next afternoon, I followed the directions to a quiet tree-lined street about 20 minutes from campus. The house was older than I expected, not falling apart, but definitely weathered. The paint was faded, the steps creaked as I walked up, and the porch was cluttered with wind chimes, potted plants, and crystals arranged in little clusters around a wooden Buddha statue. I knocked. After a moment, the door opened, and a man in his late 60s stood there barefoot, wearing linen pants and a gray tunic. His long silver hair was tied back in a braid, and his eyes lit up when he saw me. "Ah," he said, stepping aside. "You really came." I nodded slowly, unsure whether to feel relieved or unsettled. "You must be—" "Martin. That's the name I go by in this life," he said with a smile. "But you knew me as Arik once, in southern India, in the third cycle." I blinked, thinking maybe he was joking. He wasn't. For the next hour, Martin, or Arik, led me on a tour of the house, pausing constantly to talk about energetic echoes, past life alignment, and karmic tension in the air. The house was full of incense floor cushions and paper lanterns. The room for rent was small but neat, with soft lighting and a mattress on the floor. I asked about the rent, the utilities, the rules. He nodded along, but every answer turned into something bigger, something spiritual. "I don't charge for shelter," he said at one point. "I charge for the disruption your spirit brings into this cycle. But don't worry, you feel familiar. The price is fair." I laughed nervously, unsure what that meant. He just smiled again and said, "Let the house decide. It always knows who belongs." As the tour wrapped up, Martin offered me a cup of tea, some strange herbal blend that smelled like licorice and dried flowers. I accepted it out of politeness, though I had no intention of drinking it. He said he needed to step out back to check on the garden's chai, whatever that meant, and left through a sliding glass door with a faint jingle of beads. I stood there in the kitchen alone for the first time since arriving, still trying to process everything. That's when I noticed the fridge. It was old and covered in papers, flyers, clippings, small drawings, and Polaroids held up by colorful magnets. Most of them looked like random snapshots of nature. Trees, rocks, the moon. But one photo near the top stopped me cold. It was me. I was standing outside my dorm building, backpack slung over one shoulder, head turned as if mid-conversation. I recognized the shirt I wore. It was from 2 weeks ago. There was no mistaking it. The photo wasn't cropped, wasn't part of a group shot. It was zoomed in, taken from across the street or behind a car, blurry around the edges, but sharp on my face. My blood ran cold. I stepped closer, heartbeat thudding in my ears. Beneath the photo in looping handwriting was a note scribbled in black marker, "Found her again. Energy still intact. Fourth return confirmed." My breath caught. I backed away from the fridge, from the photo, from the tea still steaming on the counter. I heard the sliding door creak open behind me. Martin's voice was calm and steady. "Ah, I see you found it. I was wondering when the house would show you." I turned slowly, and he was smiling like this was all perfectly natural, like this was always meant to happen. I forced a smile, my throat tight, every instinct in my body screaming to get out. I just remembered I said quickly, reaching for my phone like it had just buzzed. "I have to meet my roommate. She's locked out. Total emergency." Martin didn't react at first. He just watched me, tilting his head slightly like he was observing a painting. Then he gave a slow, knowing nod. "Of course. The present always calls us back, even when the past is reaching forward." I backed toward the door, trying to keep my steps steady. "Thank you for the tour. I'll text if I'm still interested." He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You will be. They always come back. Cycles don't break just because we want them to." I didn't answer. I stepped out into the sun, heart pounding, and didn't look back. I walked fast until I was around the corner, then broke into a jog. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking. I never texted him, never answered his follow-up call the next day. I deleted the Craigslist app, blocked the number. But for weeks I felt watched, like something from a life I never lived had found me anyway and was still waiting for me to return. A full month passed before I let myself believe it was over. The house, the photo on the fridge, Martin's unnerving calm, all of it started to feel like a strange, fading memory. I never saw him again. My new apartment was overpriced, but normal. My roommate was messy, but human. I started sleeping better, stopped checking over my shoulder. I even laughed about it once or twice, with friends brushing it off like a weird story to tell someday. Then the email came. It was a Tuesday morning early. I was rushing to finish a paper when I noticed a new message in my inbox. No subject line. The address was a jumble of letters and numbers, nothing recognizable. I clicked it without thinking. There was only one sentence. "You were supposed to live here." That was it. No greeting, no name, no link. Just those 6 words. My stomach turned. I checked the sender's info. The email had been created 2 days earlier. No profile photo, no location, no social media connection. I blocked it immediately, but it didn't stop the chill that ran down my spine. I hadn't given Martin my email. I'd only texted him. Craigslist didn't display addresses. So how did he know I didn't tell anyone this time? I just sat there staring at the screen, realizing that maybe he hadn't been joking when he said the house decides. Maybe it had chosen me. And maybe I hadn't escaped, I just delayed something I still didn't fully understand. Because if he could find my email, who's to say he didn't already know where I lived now, or worse, who I used to be? Story 7. The yard work setup. I broke my leg slipping on ice in my driveway, just a stupid accident on a cold February morning. One second I was walking out to grab a package, the next I was face down in the snow with a sharp, nauseating pain shooting up my right side. The doctors called it a clean fracture, but recovery still meant 6 weeks of barely walking and another 2 of moving slow and stiff like an old machine. By the 3rd week, my yard had started to look like a jungle. I live alone on the edge of a wooded neighborhood where everyone prides themselves on neat lawns and flower beds. I didn't care about appearances, but the weeds were out of control and the leaves from last fall still covered most of the back patio. I needed help, so I posted on Craigslist. Simple, clear yard work help needed, one-time cleanup, $60 cash. Prefers someone with their own tools. Please email availability. Within hours, I got 3 replies. One guy wanted way too much money. Another didn't have his own tools. The 3rd message was short and polite. His name was Tyler, said he lived just a few streets over and could stop by the next morning to check out the yard. He showed up at 10 a.m. sharp. Early 20s, soft-spoken, wore worn-out jeans and a faded baseball cap. Kept eye contact just long enough to be respectful and didn't talk much. When I opened the door and pointed to the tool shed, he nodded and got right to work. Something about him felt neutral. Not friendly, not cold, just present. I didn't think twice. I made coffee and watched from the kitchen as he raked leaves into neat piles, methodical and quiet. It was the first time in weeks I felt like things might start getting back to normal. The first visit went perfectly. Tyler worked for nearly 3 hours, never took a break, and left the yard looking better than it had in months. He even coiled the hose without being asked. I handed him $60 in cash through the screen door, thanked him, and he nodded with a slight smile before walking off down the street. No car, just a canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. A few days later, I reached out again. My leg was healing, but I still couldn't manage the back slope or trim the hedges. Tyler replied almost immediately and came by the next morning. But this time, something was different. He arrived wearing the same clothes, even the same hat, and still said almost nothing. I offered water, he declined. But the work took longer, much longer. By hour 4, I peeked out the back window and saw him just standing there, rake in hand, staring at the woods behind the property. Not moving, not working, just still. I waited a few minutes trying to brush it off as a break. But 20 minutes later, he was still out there facing the trees, not raking, not trimming. Eventually, he resumed working, like nothing happened, finished the job, took the cash, and walked away. It unsettled me, but I needed the help. So the 3rd time I texted him, I made sure to be home the entire time, watching more closely. About an hour in, I went to the kitchen to refill my tea and noticed movement outside the corner of my eye. Tyler was in the side yard near the bedroom window. He wasn't trimming the hedge. He had his hand pressed flat against the glass, staring into the room. My bedroom. And this time, he wasn't pretending to work. I froze for a second, watching from behind the curtain, barely breathing. Tyler didn't move. His palm was flat against the glass, like he was feeling for something. His head tilted slightly, as if listening. My bed was just on the other side. I reached for my phone without taking my eyes off him, quickly snapped a photo through the narrow gap between the blinds. The sound was muted, but I swore he flinched. A second later, he stepped back, turned away, and walked slowly around the corner back toward the bushes he was supposed to be trimming. I stood there for another minute, heart racing, unsure what to do. He hadn't done anything technically illegal. Not yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but every instinct screamed that something was off. I waited until he was packing up his tools to step outside. I kept my voice calm, steady. "Thanks again," I said, handing him an envelope with cash already inside. "That should cover today." He nodded, gave the same faint smile as always. I hesitated, then added, "I think this will be the last time, though. My leg's healing up. I won't need help anymore." His eyes flicked up to mine for a little too long, still smiling. But there was something behind it this time, something unreadable. "Sure," he said, sliding the envelope into his pocket. "Glad I could help." Then he turned and walked off like always, disappearing down the same road, the same casual stride. I went back inside and locked every door. Double-checked the windows. That night I transferred the photo to my laptop. His face was clear, focused, and something about the way he looked at the window chilled me more than anything else. He hadn't been curious. He had been waiting. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the image of Tyler's hand on the glass, the long stare, the way he smiled when I told him not to come back. It had all seemed harmless at first, just a guy doing yard work. But now, every shadow outside the window felt like it might move, and every creak of the house made my heart jump. I finally dozed off around 2 a.m. The photo of him still open on my laptop screen dimmed, but not off. Sometime later, I woke with a start. I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep at first. No storm, no alarms, just silence. But then I heard it, a soft rattling, coming from the side of the house, the same side as my bedroom. I held my breath and sat up slowly listening. The rattling stopped, replaced by the faintest crunch of gravel. Then the unmistakable sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on the patio stones. Someone was in my yard. I moved as quietly as I could, grabbing my phone and tiptoeing to the window without turning on a light. I peeked through the blinds. At first, all I saw was the outline of trees and the faint reflection of the street lamp in the distance. Then, just at the edge of the yard, I caught it. A figure, not running, walking, moving away toward the woods behind the fence. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't have to. The build, the stride, it was Tyler. He hadn't come to talk. He hadn't come to work. He just stood there, watching. Again. I backed away from the window, locked it tight, and sat on the floor with my phone in my lap, heart pounding. This time, I knew I couldn't pretend it was nothing. I barely slept the rest of the night. I stayed on the floor until the sun started to rise, phone in one hand, the kitchen knife I'd grabbed in the other. Every noise made me jump. I kept checking the locks, the windows, even the closets. By morning, my head was spinning from exhaustion. But I was alive. The figure had vanished. No broken glass, no forced entry. Just a lingering dread that soaked into every corner of the house. When the daylight felt strong enough, I finally stood up, stretched my sore limbs, and forced myself to believe maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the fear had taken over and I was starting to see things that weren't there. I walked into my bedroom to make the bed desperate for a return to something normal. But as I lifted the pillow, I saw it. A piece of white paper folded in half, not there the night before. My hands trembled as I picked it up and opened it. Written in neat, deliberate handwriting were 4 words. "You forgot to pay me." That was it. No name, no punctuation. Just those words written in blue ink on a page that smelled faintly of sweat and earth. I dropped it instantly, heart slamming against my ribs. I had paid him. I remembered handing him the envelope clear as day. He had been inside the house, not outside, not watching. Inside. Sometime during the night. I called the police. They searched the house, found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no Tyler in their system, at least not the one who matched my photo. They told me to stay somewhere else, so I packed a bag and left. But I never sold the house, because some part of me needed to know if he'd ever come back looking for what he thought I owed. 2 weeks after I left the house, I got a call from the police. They had arrested someone matching Tyler's description in a nearby town. He'd been caught trying to enter a different home, another Craigslist job gone wrong. The homeowner had cameras, and Tyler had been filmed creeping around the back door with a crowbar at midnight. When they searched his backpack, they found a bundle of random house keys, gloves, and a list of addresses, including mine, written on a crumpled receipt. He wasn't Tyler. His real name was Derek Holloway. No record of employment, no family nearby. Just a string of aliases and years of bouncing around towns, picking up odd jobs. They linked him to at least 3 other break-ins, maybe more. The photo I had taken helped confirm his identity. And the note, "You forgot to pay me," matched the handwriting in a worn notebook they found among his things. Pages and pages of names, times, and cryptic messages. After the arrest, I went back to the house, not to stay, but to change the locks, add security bars to the windows, and install cameras on every side. I didn't feel safe living there anymore, but I couldn't stand the idea of letting him take that space from me forever. I've since moved to a place with more neighbors and fewer shadows. But I still keep the screenshot of that Craigslist post and the picture of him pressing his hand against my window. Not as trophies, just reminders. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I hadn't looked up at the right moment, if I hadn't trusted my instincts. So I'm telling this now to anyone listening. If you ever hire a stranger off the internet, watch more than their work. Because not every job ends when the tools go back in the shed. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.